Thank you for inviting me to Poland, to Warsaw. And, oops, can I see? There we go. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Warsaw, so thank you for that. It was funny, as Kate was talking about it, I'd forgotten that Kate cried in an exercise we were running that she'd developed. Those moments are they're kind of instrumental or crucial to relationships and to really how you act as a leader. And maybe I did okay. I don't know. I could have done better, I'm sure. Anyway, so firstly, I'd just like to say this presentation is unfortunately not going to talk about sex robots. I'm sorry. I thought about pivoting and making it all about, but after extensive research last night, I have decided that I haven't really got the energy now to talk about them. Instead, it's going to talk about something that's really an interesting movement that's adjacent or connected to the Agile world. And we're going to be talking about this thing called an Agile product operating model. And we're going to be talking about how perhaps it's becoming the next wave of change in many of the large corporates that you're working at. So that's what I'm going to try to share. That's me, Dave West. If you want to contact me, that's my coordinates. Feel free to. I like talking about this stuff. I like sharing, and I'm always interested in different points of view. So feel free to reach out to me, LinkedIn or X, or obviously old-fashioned email. So I run an organization for Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum. He's my boss. I've known Ken for 25 years. The first time I met him, I was the RUP product manager, and he told me I was an idiot, which maybe he was right. Somehow, though, we managed to get through that initial conversation, and we became good friends, and he mentored me during my time at Forrester Research and then TaskTop, which was a startup that we created that we sold to PlanView, and he was my mentor. But can you imagine what it's like to run a sprint review and have a stakeholder, Ken Schwaber, in the room who invented the whole thing that you're working on? And by the way, the sprint review is about Scrum. So you're like, oh gosh, it's very challenging for sure. You know what scrum.org does. There's many trainers, PSTs here, so they can tell you if you need to know. One thing though I would just put up, because I think it's an important framing for what I'm going to be talking about next, is some numbers. About, 6 weeks ago, we went past over 1 million certified professionals. Now, obviously, that's a nice vanity metric, and I feel very proud being part of an organization that's managed to touch, that sounds a bit inappropriate, managed to connect with so many human beings. People all over the world take PSM1, PSPO1, etc. It's really incredible. Any one moment, there's somebody taking it, which is incredible. But the real reason why I put that up is because I think it shows you the amount of change Agile has driven. You know, I sit down with Ken frequently and say, did you ever imagine? And he says no. He built Scrum with Jeff to solve a problem. They were working at Patient Keeper in Burlington, Massachusetts, just outside Boston, and they couldn't deliver. Jeff was the CTO. He brought in Ken to do the work. Actually, he brought him in because he was trying to set him up with his sister, but that's a whole nother story. And they were working together, and they came with two very different idea sets, and ultimately created Scrum, delivered Patient Keeper, Ken went on to FBI Sentinel, Fidelity, and the rest is history. But it was by accident, not on purpose. He built it because software is complex, right? The environment, you can do many things. You've got the opportunity to do many things, and because of that, it creates a level of complexity. But now, this is true everywhere. 1.2 people come to our website every month. Got about 360 licensed trainers, 48 countries, 201 partners. The impact that Scrum has had on the world cannot be under-mentioned or described. And I think the reason why is because we live in an age where there's a significant amount of change. We heard that yesterday in both keynotes. We heard that the world, maybe because of AI, is going to change. Craig talked a lot about that. The fact that we have the opportunity to build the most incredible things. Perhaps one of the most exciting stories about Scrum happened in March 2020 in the Broad Institute in Boston. This was written in Nature magazine, where the Institute was doing lots of genetic research, and because of COVID, they had to stop. So they stopped, and there was a Scrum Master who said, hang on a minute, we do testing, that's what we do, we know how to do that. We could set up a test lab to test for COVID-19, couldn't we? And she did. Basically, she formed a cross-functional team out of the professionals, the scientists at the Broad Institute, and created a test lab within a couple of weeks. And that was the first one that we had in Boston, which was incredible. And because of it, she could get working again, and the Broad Institute came on. She offered that service to our local community. They then took advantage of it. The art of the possible in an environment that's continuously changing, in a situation that she'd never faced before and her team had never faced before. It's amazing the power of Scrum in the context of a complex problem. And the world is significantly complex. So previous to the digital age that we're all in, it was the industrial age. And that was when a small group of people did work in a complex environment. They then took out all the variability as much as they could. And then efficiency stepped in. Mass production, as we call it. And now we're in a different world. A world that is actually not that hard to survive in. It's actually pretty simple. You decide on what you want to focus on. In the case of the lady at the Broad Institute, it was to build a test platform for COVID-19 with the materials and the environment that she had at her disposal in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So she had a very clear focus on what the business problem was she was solving. She built a team. She assembled a team actually from a bunch of random scientists, research associates, and she had to get the premises people involved as well, because she was actually building a test lab, and she did that. They were empowered to make the decision. I think if you read the article, I think it sort of implies that she asked for forgiveness, not for permission. She just did it. And there was an organization around it that allowed that to foster. Do, learn, plan, do, learn, plan, do, learn, plan. Everything that we know, right? It's very simple. And of course, you need to have transparency through this process, transparency of the way you're working, transparency of the actual work itself. So that means you have to measure it, you have to know what the outcomes are, etc. And the things that get in the way, size, dependencies, impediments, management, all of those things get in the way, you can remove them. And you have to effectively work in this new paradigm, this complex environment. And Agile isn't the only body of knowledge that talks about this. Obviously, you've got the flow work, design thinking, lean startup, lean UX, all of these things say the same kind of thing over and over again. Cynefin, the sense-making framework, all of these repeat this over and over again. So we know how to do it. So why don't we? So when I was research director at Forrester Research, I did some research on Scrum. And I found that Scrum was being used by, at that point, this was a long time ago, about 70% of IT teams were using Scrum in North America at that time. So I was like, oh, that's really exciting, isn't it? That's an awesome piece of data. So then I interviewed those teams. It was much more disappointing. They were doing something called Water, Scrum, Fall. And that's an article I wrote. Basically, they were doing Scrum. Oh, yeah, we're doing Scrum, but planning happens once a year. Because, it's a huge overhead. It's very hard. And different people are involved in that. And we get a work backlog, and I'm a work team, and we don't really have sprint goals or product goals, but we have work goals. We have a definition of ready gate before work comes in to ensure that we actually can deliver it. So there's a separate process happening to do refinement and analysis and requirements, etc. Then we have a daily status of work meeting where we talk about the status of the work, green, red, blue, whatever. And then we release to a production process. And of course, we have a retro where we check velocity. I was like, wow, that's interesting. That isn't, I think, what Scrum's all about, but good on you. And we continue to see that over and over again. The reality is, in most organizations, business strategy is complex and unclear, which basically means nobody wants to say no to anything. They say yes to everything. You go into an organization, you say, what do you do? And you say, I work on a project. How many projects are you working on? 7, 9, 16. They like projects so much, we do hundreds of them. It's great. The business and technology is fundamentally disconnected. Even in banks and financial institutions, organizations that are by their very nature digital, but that's separate. IT's over there, it's capital expense, we treat it differently. Teams built around skills. We saw that yesterday in Craig's presentation, and Wordy was talking about it as well, that you have these separation. People aren't really working as teams. They're separate individuals working with a particular skill. In fact, they're even incentivized like that. Their KPIs and everything are around individual performance. America is a big fan of individual performance, the self-made man, that myth that we talk about in America all the time. There's no such thing as one, but we talk about it a lot. Lack of empowerment and support, obviously. Risk. How many times have you been to a meeting to discuss an expense, let's say $500, and you look around the meeting, and it's an hour-long meeting, and you do the math, and you spent $2,000? Does that happen? Yes, over and over again, because getting things wrong not getting things wrong is more important than getting things right. That's the whole point. We're not built for innovation. We're built for just carrying on. Some of you may have heard my baseball analogy yesterday. Plan. Review, plan, status, etc. Manage cost and risk. We all know that. Sometimes we call this the project mindset. Sometimes we basically are describing most organizations we work in, right? And this isn't just true of corporate world, it's also true of the most interesting innovations that humankind are working on at the moment. So I'm going to tell you a story about 2 programs, space programs. Well, 1 space program, but 2 vendors. And I've not actually talked to these 2 organizations. I did have a conversation with SpaceX once, but about something completely different. So this is based on a few articles. Probably the best one is the one referenced out. It's a really good read. I recommend it. It's fantastic. So in 2014, 2012, the US government, NASA, was deciding that it needed to get human beings back into space. The space shuttle program had been decommissioned. We're all very aware of the Challenger disaster, etc. Awful disasters. And because of that, the only way Americans could get into space was either on a Russian rocket or the European. Actually, no, I think it was just Russian rockets at that point. So they decided they wanted to commission it, a new program. And they put $5.5, this is America, we put $5.5 billion, because we can, into a pot and said, yeah, let's spend it. And we got T-shirts and stuff like that printed. And they decided to give it to 2 organizations, Boeing, who are famous for delivering amazing space innovation. Mercury program, Apollo, obviously everybody's aware of that. They were the prime contractor on some of the most important space adventures that the US had ever embarked upon. So Boeing got $4.1 billion. Now, because we're fair in American NASA and all that, they wanted to spread the wealth a little bit just to show that they were supporting entrepreneurs. And there was this very noisy South African called Elon Musk who was just going on and on and on. And so they gave SpaceX $1 billion. 1.1, I think it was. Now, we know what happened because of this. So Starliner has been an unmitigated failure. In fact, such a failure that there's 2 astronauts currently stuck on a space station, the International Space Station, because they couldn't trust the spaceship, Starliner, to take them home. Not only that, it was 3 years behind schedule, it was billions of dollars over budget, it was just awful. SpaceX, as everybody's very aware, they probably follow them on Twitter now, like I do, are launching continuously. And I think what Laurie says there, it really sums it up. The 2 companies' cultures, design philosophies, decision-making structures allowed SpaceX to excel in a fixed-price environment where Boeing stumbled. So something I didn't mention earlier was that this program, this $5 billion, that was it. We had a mission. This is what you have to do. Here's the money. Do it. Now, Boeing weren't designed for that. They were designed around projects. They loved milestones. So they took that big number and big objective, and they turned it into a really comprehensive project plan with lots of milestones. They also executed their usual project-based approach. SpaceX didn't do that. They said, oh, that's our mission? What's the smallest thing we can do to move towards that? Is it possible that that small thing can actually deliver us revenue? Oh, we can put some satellites up. That's good. Oh, we can test this, a low orbit. Oh, we can do some space tourism. Oh, we can. So they basically had this long-term mission, which is part of a much longer-term mission, which is all about making humanity a multi-planet species, which is kind of deep and big. And they had this as a thing along that way. And they worked to that. They did not have, they do have subcontractors, but ultimately they kept it simple. They didn't have massive amounts of middle management. Boeing had a lot. They didn't use milestones to structure how money was being allocated to their subcontractors. They delivered incrementally, literally, one opportunity at a time, or what we would say, one sprint or one product goal at a time. And ultimately, it's been an absolute success what SpaceX has done. Now, Boeing is an amazing organization full of amazing engineers. I'm not dissing Boeing, though I prefer to fly Airbus, but that's got nothing, well, it kind of has got something to do with this, interestingly, because one of the problems that they had with their resource-based culture was that they moved people around all the time, and when they had the disaster on the aircraft, they moved people from the space program, their best engineers, which then left the space program in a bit of a mess. So, it just didn't work. And unfortunately, we have 2 astronauts that are running out of underwear on the space station at the moment. They'd only packed enough for a week. Don't you hate that when your flight's delayed and you have to turn your underpants inside out? Imagine what it's like for them. You can't go to a 7-Eleven. Yeah, it would be a little bit challenging. Now, yesterday, I think, SpaceX launched, no, that was a few days ago, but it docked yesterday, a supply craft up to help them, so they'll be coming back soon on a SpaceX spacecraft. So it's going to be okay, and we're lucky that Barry Wilmore and Sunita Williams will get home, hopefully for Christmas, but we'll see. So what's interesting is this culture thing. So at the heart of the difference is this idea of project versus product, or product versus project. SpaceX definitely run their organization, Tesla's the same, with a product mindset. A mindset that's very focused on a mission, very focused on building these products. And whereas Boeing, historically, coming from the previous technology age, is very project-centric. That's just the reality. And these are some of the differences, outcome versus output. Boeing delivered a lot of documentation over the last 11 years or 10 years for their program. Yeah, loads of milestones, loads of reports, loads of artifacts. Excellent. SpaceX delivered working rocket ships. bit different. Product orientation is flexible. So when SpaceX hit a problem, which you may have seen them many times, they blew up a lot of spaceships, they inspected, adapted, and learned. There's a great interview of Elon Musk when he was nice. He was interviewed by one of these YouTubers, because that was the cool thing to do, right? About the very early space flight. And they were standing really near the spaceship, and she said, how, is this really risky? Is it, and she was, 14 or whatever. And he goes, yeah, it's probably going to blow up. And she looked at him, and he looked at her, and he goes, no, well, we'll move before it takes off, don't worry. And he goes, and if it blows up, you know what? We'll learn a lot more than if it doesn't. That's not the mentality. Imagine you, if you're just releasing a piece of software or releasing a product, and your boss is there, and you say, hey, boss, we've been working really hard. It's awesome. And he goes, how likely is it to be successful? You say, no idea. In fact, it's almost better if it isn't, because then we're going to learn loads. If nobody uses this, it's going to be awesome, because we'll learn lots. Have you gone mad? You insane? And you may be. But this is the different sort of culture. Time, scope, cost is managed by SpaceX. Don't get me wrong. If you've ever, I've been to the Tesla factory in Fremont and the NUMMI factory, and they are cheap. Not for coffee. They have the best coffee in the world. I've never experienced coffee like it. But they don't like spending money at all. That's not their thing. But they're not focused on money. They're focused on value. They make those right trade-offs. They wouldn't have a meeting to discuss a $500 investment that costs more, because they all are thinking that way. They have permanent teams aligned. They do have, obviously, movement with teams. It's 10 years this program's been on, so people retire, people have babies, change does happen, but they have that they onboard people, offboard people. That's the key. Focused, outcome, outcome, outcome. And there's really three things that I want to talk about: mindset, alignment, and investment, that really embody this product mindset. The mindset is probably the most important thing. They approach every problem with a view to stakeholders, users, outcomes, dependencies, ownership, and value. The most important thing about the mindset isn't actually the customer centricity that it provides, which is really useful, don't get me wrong. It's the ability to say no. The most powerful tool that a product gives us is, that's not on our product roadmap, that isn't part of this product, sorry. It gives that clarity of decision making. Really powerful. And it gives some level of ownership, which is really crucial as well. Alignment. So as soon as you have that mindset and you have an idea of your products, then you can align to it. The most successful Scrum teams I've ever seen aren't the smartest, well, they're all smart, awesome people, I'm sure, but they're not the smartest people necessarily, but they have a clear understanding of the customer. They have a clear line of sight to the problem they're trying to solve. They're clearly aligned, which is very important. The last one is investment. The other thing that's really good about product is you can invest in a product mindset, meaning you can actually invest in your products. Now, hopefully a product has a clear understanding of value. So now you're making those ROI investment decisions rather than this sort of bizarre business case that's associated with a project. And that allows us to manage our portfolio. It also allows us to say no as well around investments. Because we're investing in this product means we're not investing in this product. This product's at a certain stage of its life. Maybe we're end-of-lifing it, so we're going to reduce the investment. That means we're going to have to make tough decisions, but making tough decisions is something that corporate America hates to do, but is crucial to us being effective. Now, you can take all of these three things, mindset, alignment, investment, and then you become a product-oriented organization. Or you can just take mindset, and that at least helps you frame the problems you're working on. So if we sort of take it back, okay, so product seems to be the thing that made SpaceX successful compared to Boeing. We talked about Scrum not being as effective as we would like. In fact, we see it being really good at delivering work, which it is good at, don't get me wrong, but it could be so much more. We could empower these teams or these collections of individuals, if you believe what was talked about yesterday, and really give them, ramp them up to be more effective. We could do that if we did something different with Scrum, if we had a different mindset in our organization, if we aligned differently, and if we invested differently. So I would argue that it is time for us to start really taking that up a level. Now, the embodiment of that is something called an operating model, right? An operating model is just the way in which you operate to support your strategy. It's the visualization of it, nothing more than that. Each product needs an operating model to be successful. It needs to be agile by orientation because of the complexity that we're focused on. And it might be the next thing in the evolution of agility. So when Ken and Jeff started, and the other members of that Agile group, they were very focused on teams, on work at that level. Then, of course, things like LESS, from people like Craig and SAFE, and Nexus, from people like us, Scrum.org, came out around scaling. Then the management consulting firms took that and started to talk about business agility. And so you saw the Spotify model and things like that, so McKinsey, BCG, etc. Now, maybe we're bringing modern product ideas, lean startup, design thinking, lean UX, etc. Bringing that, combining it with Agile in the context of all what we've learned on this journey. Maybe this is the next evolution for agility. Maybe this is the next big thing. Or maybe not, but we'll see. So what's an operating model? Really boring. It's an abstraction, a visual representation of the organization that delivers value. God, it's pretty boring, isn't it? Anyway, so it's how you do it, really. It's like, now why is it not an operating system? Absolutely no idea. Could be an operating system, but whenever I think of operating systems, I think of Windows 3.1 and MS-DOS, because I'm that old. And people don't talk about operating systems anymore, really, do they? But it doesn't matter what it's called. Operating model, operating system, operation, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. And there's lots of approaches. If you Googleize it, you will see, or ask ChatGPT, you will see there's lots of different ways. You can do value stream, you can do this, you can do that to represent this. And all of them have merit. I've decided to use a very old-fashioned approach where you think about it in terms of people, organization, processes, governance, culture, measures, and incentive. So it's very important for each of these 5 things that we put in place a series of principles that ensure that it's agile. So how do we think about all of this in an agile way that supports product, that allows us to effectively deliver value to our customers and to our stakeholders? Now you look at it in the context of a strategy. A product model and a product portfolio, which obviously is defined by what a product is, has to be in support of a strategy. When there's no strategy, it makes it really hard. And that sometimes is the hardest thing. I've seen this being implemented, like at Fidelity Investments. They're doing it, but it meant they had to really step back and say, what is our strategy around this? Why are we investing in this as opposed to that? Where historically it's been more fluid than that. And then that leads to a product operating model. So, what is a product? That's at the heart of it, right? What is a product? In the 2020 Scrum Guide, much to the annoyance of many, we created this definition. A product is a vehicle to deliver value. It's a clear boundary, known stakeholders, well-defined users or customers. A product could be a service, a physical product, or something more abstract. So I've seen product used in the very literal sense, I don't know if any of you use the latest Gillette razor, the exfoliating razor from Gillette. That was built using Scrum. How cool is that? It had a Super Bowl ad. I've never worked with an organization that's using Scrum where there's a Super Bowl ad. It's very cool. And it's an awesome razor. I can attest to it. I used it this morning, actually. Thank you. And that's a very physical product, right? That's a product. And we used a product model to actually decompose that. So there was multiple products around the supply chain, around the digital support, et cetera, that provided support for that. Another organization I work with is called Dino Therapeutics. They do machine learning, so AI, and CRISPR technology, or genetic research. What could possibly go wrong? And these two ideas, I think they might be building a Terminator or some such thing. But their products are actually diseases, genetic-based diseases. Some of the most horrible, cruel diseases that plague the world, right? And so they have their product teams, cross-functional, computer scientists, biologists, geneticists, research associates, PhDs, MDs, all of this. They have their teams aligned around that. Now, interestingly, the products that come out, there's a level of variability as they pursue different research opportunities. Like they may discover that this particular protein and this particular thing work in a certain way. They try it, they do multiple tests, they realize it's a dead end. So they start again. So that's another product. So I can't tell you what your products are going to be. But what I can tell you, the best products that I've encountered are ones that have a clear understanding by everybody. It's obvious. Value is easy to measure and are manageable in size and scope, so they're not too big. Shared services can be products. If you look at Fidelity Investment and their use of product, what they're doing is they're basically broken down their IT systems into a product catalog. And they've made some interesting decisions about buy, build, end of life, retire. Is that Salesforce? Is that whatever? And they've made these decisions based on this catalog because they understand the importance of what Tesla also does, core and context. What's strategic to us and what isn't in this product catalog? They still need the other bits, but they don't care if it's more of a commodity, and they're not innovating. The other thing that Fidelity and other organizations have the opportunity now is maybe they can sell, like AWS did in terms of their products, these products to some other organizations. So it gives other revenue streams as well. So shared services can be products. Projects still exist. GDPR would be a great example of that, right? Goes across multiple products. And what's interesting, though, it's up to the product owners, product managers, to make decisions about what of these projects are going to be implemented when on their product portfolio. So that's interesting as well. Projects just become another stakeholder, basically. So let's start with things that you need to have when you're defining your product. So number one thing, you need to understand its strategic importance, its business roadmap. Where's it going? What's its objectives? How do we align it to overall business strategy and to the mission of the organization? So you can imagine that at SpaceX, there's a lot of time spent understanding this part of the system, which is a product. How's it defining in terms of its long-term mission of helping us get to Mars and beyond? Technology roadmap. What's happening from a technology point of view? Operational roadmap or stability description. Who makes decisions about the investment and about the choices? And how do we manage risk around that? Maybe we have fiduciary responsibility to our organization. Who makes those decisions? And everybody's clear on that. And what's the economic model or total cost of value? Those elements need to be in place. Now, on some products, this is a sheet of paper, maybe even a Post-it note. On other products, this is quite a healthy description, as it were. But it's incredibly important to have these perspectives because that influences the choices you're going to make in very practical terms on the backlog, on the roadmap, on the vision, on where the product's going to go. It also provides clarity of this is our product, this is what service we're providing if it's a shared service. So it's more than just to name a product. You then have to build the operating model that supports that product. So I'm not going to go into detail of all of these. I've got slides that go for days on some of these. But the elements that I want to pull out, the 5 elements, have to support agility. So what's the number one thing that they need to have to allow us to support agility? In people and organization, it's all about teams, self-managed and empowered. So self-managed and empowered. Most organizations don't really have teams. I think we talked about that yesterday. So how do we build an environment where we actually do? Remember, they're cross-functional as well. I should have written that there. That means we have to have a supporting organization because you may be the only UX person, or there may not be a UX person. So how do you get UX help in your cross-functional team, for example? Measures and incentives. Measures and incentives are really interesting because they can't help as such, but they certainly can hinder. So Fidelity Investments was the second company ever, or third company ever to do Scrum. And it was incredibly successful. You know, they're even referenced in the Scrum Guide, right? And they built the online brokerage platform using Scrum. Brilliant. Ken says it was the most successful project he ever worked on because it paid for his daughter to go to college. So she went to Harvard, so I guess that wasn't cheap. And very, very successful. And then they said, this is brilliant. This is awesome. We've tasted nectar from the gods and we want more. And I'm not sure they said that. That would be very un-Boston-like. They probably said, it's not bad. Anyway, so they then wanted to roll it out to many projects and many programs. This is before the idea of product model. So they did. Didn't work. Why? Well, ultimately, Fidelity, like many organizations in the US, incentivize people by individual KPIs, key performance indicators. Those KPIs have a massive material impact on their bonus. And in finance, bonus can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? A year. It can help your kid go to Harvard. So if you disalign the way people are working from the incentives that they're working to, not only do you get a massive amount of dissonance, but you potentially undermine the whole system. Being an expert is crucial in most organizations, but we want to build transparency, cross-functional, and flexibility. Those two things are at odds. We promote people for their expertise and their criticalness in an organization, but we don't want that to be agile. So you have this dissonance, which ultimately undermines most change initiatives. Agile processes, yeah, we have to ensure that the processes are agile. I'm not saying they have to be Scrum, but it would help. Empirical, self-managed, continuously improving. So look at any process at scale that you're using and make sure it does those 3 things for sure. I don't know anything about culture. It seems to be like, I don't know if you've ever been to a restaurant. It was really big in the 90s. You'd go to a restaurant in the States, and this guy would come up to you and do close magic. You ever seen close magic? It's amazing. You're on a date, and he's got your wallet and your watch in his hands, and your underpants in his hands. I mean, I don't know how he does it, but they're doing this close magic. And I think culture's a bit like that. You know when you see it, and you can sort of feel it, but you have no idea how it happens, right? So I can't give you any real advice about how you create a culture that fosters it. There's obviously been lots of studies like Project Aristotle from Google that has talked a lot about it. But what I do know is trust, safety, curiosity are some of the elements that I would expect to be nurturing in my organization. and I'm not sure how to do it. It depends on the organization, but ultimately it's about creating an environment where the leaders exhibit the behaviors that you want, and that's considered to be good, I guess. Last thing's governance. You need to understand who owns what, and that's crucial. If you can do that, then everything works, and you need to have processes that ensure transparency to, compliance and audit, etc. So, we have what is a product. It's more than just a name, technology roadmap, business roadmap, etc. We have the operating model that supports it, organization, process, etc. Why is it evidence-based? And this is where it gets kind of interesting. Evidence-based. So, a long time ago now, over 10 years ago, Ken invented this thing called evidence-based management. You might know it as OKRs and flow metrics, because that also has come out. But what evidence-based management gives us is a way of looking at work and a way of looking at the things that we're delivering to be more accountable for the value that they're delivering to the outside world. It was based on the idea of evidence-based medicine, which is a really important trend in medicine. So ultimately, we need to ensure that we have measures in place for our product that drive the behavior that we want. And those measures can't be inward-looking. Well, not very inward-looking. They need to actually make sense. And that's the reason why we have these 4 key value areas. Unrealized value, current value, that's market value, and then organizational capability to deliver change in a more effective way, ability to innovate, and cycle time or time to market. Now, those 4 measures are really important because there's 2 very important roles in the product operating model. And maybe some of you can feel yourselves in those roles today. One is product owner, product manager. Now, I'm using both terms there because it depends on your organization what the job title will be. Ultimately, there needs to be somebody that's accountable for driving unrealized value and current value into the product that you're building. So, ensuring that current value doesn't shrink massively and that there's new opportunities that are adding capabilities to the product to deliver new value. Now, sometimes that's measured by revenue, sometimes that's measured by people, whatever. And the outcomes, the success, maybe it's students going through a system, maybe in the case of Dino, it's about actually delivering a protocol to a pharmaceutical or biotech company to actually mass market and create a cure for a genetic disease. So they have a very clear understanding of current value and unrealized value. The other important role is Scrum Master or Delivery Manager. So I am a big fan of Scrum Masters being delivery managers. Boo hiss, I know. But ultimately, whether they're called delivery managers or whether they're not, doesn't really matter as long as they have the authority to execute on the things that need to be executed to ensure their teams and teams of teams are delivering continuously, time to market, and what they're delivering is inclusive of innovation. Now you might say, well, shouldn't a product owner is all about innovation? No. That's the what, not the how. So, in the simplest form, if you're using Jira, tag all of the story, all of the issues that you're releasing to be innovation or not. So if it's a bug fix, if it's an update for a mandate, if it's that, and then you can measure how much innovation you're delivering compared to how much stuff. Very important metric. And both of them are responsible for quality, governance, ethics, culture, all that. Important stuff that's cross-cutting to those 4 KVIs. So 2 very, very important roles. And maybe some of you are fulfilling those roles today. What's really exciting is, as a Scrum Master or delivery manager, you have a very clear mandate. You're not responsible, other than to help the product owner, product manager, to make sure that they're doing it, but you're not responsible for value. What you are responsible for is ensuring that the machine delivers value. Now, everybody ultimately is responsible for value, because otherwise you'll get fired, but you're focused on those two things. And that can provide a lot of clarity. So, I mentioned this yesterday, Lahmann's Law. So some of you may be sitting in the audience now, maybe a little hungover, maybe a little tired, maybe you stayed up too late last night, maybe you were researching sex robots. Well, that might be just me. Surprise, surprise, they're all in Japan, by the way, just for the record. They're very innovative. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, God, Dave, you're just trying to create the next big years. This won't work, and everything's rubbish, and you're a little bit cynical, which is fine. I respect that. And maybe you've read Lahmann's Laws, because they're a really ironic, yet quite spot-on experience that you've had in trying to change anything in your organizations. I'm a little less skeptical than Craig about change. I think that it can happen, and I think that it's more than 0.001% of organizations that can actually adopt change. But I do think it's challenging. Organizations do not want to change. Change is great when somebody else is changing. And will this be the same? So the short answer is I don't know, but a lot of people are writing some really interesting stuff on this now. BCG, McKinsey, so the consultants have got it, and I know that there was some anger to them, but they do create a market. I've built many successful revenue streams because McKinsey have been there before. It can really, really work. And people like Marty Kagan, Melissa Perry, and others, Larry, podcasts talking about this more effectively. So I think that changed. Also, what we heard yesterday about AI, I think is really interesting as well, because from my experience, and we're doing a lot of work at the moment looking at how AI is going to change our products at scrum.org, my experience is you have to have that product model in place to do the innovation around AI. Otherwise, it becomes this huge, complicated spaghetti thing, and you're not sure where the model lives or anything. So one, it's a popular topic, but that doesn't mean it's going to break Lahmann's Law. So I accept that. So we did a survey, 4,500 people, 4,205 people. So we asked them, are you doing product? 73% said yes. Ooh, sounds promising. And then we asked them, what kind of product are you doing? 56.5% said end-to-end. A whole value stream, a whole thing. So, that sounds even more promising. But it doesn't jive with what I'm seeing in the organization still. So we did a much less scientific thing. We asked our trainer community over a few face-to-faces. There's one in Gdansk Thursday, Friday this week, where we asked them to put their customers on this 2x2. This is the 2x2 that I use when I'm talking to organizations about their product capability, their ability to be product-centric. And it focuses on two axes, just for simplicity. One axis is about ownership, empowerment, the ability to make decisions. The other axis is about understanding, having a clear boundary, having a clear technical roadmap, business roadmap, all of these things. They really understand product. So I could have written this by Agile on one dimension and product on the other. Yes, I know, and maybe I should do that in the future, but that's not currently how I've done it. And then these four quadrants, the bottom left, organizations that are not really product-y, They don't really have that clarity around what a product is, and they aren't really very agile, empowered to make decisions and to have that short feedback loops. They on the bottom left, which I'd call project, and then on top right, product. That's the model. So we asked people, and I took photos, and then I've collated it in a non-scientific way. We put this chart on the ball, and I asked our trainers to fill it in. So most of their customers continue to be on the bottom left, which shouldn't come as a surprise. It's water scrum full, right? It is, the reality. So maybe your organizations are more bottom left than top right. That's okay. And you may think of yourselves as a product-centric, and that's also okay, because at least you're starting this journey. Change is hard. Product does not change that. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet, right? That's what, all things like Scrum and Agile do is make it very apparent. Now, the idea is when you make these things apparent, you then fix them. Doesn't always seem that middle management and leadership want to fix these things, and that might be fair as well. So, sorry, bit of a cold here. How do you move to APOM? It's complicated, I'm sure, but from my experience of seeing organizations, I've talked to a few that are actually introducing a product model. They may not call it APOM. And what they've done is they've basically, in the case of a consumer packaged goods company, they've taken a product that they were going to work on or they had been working on and said, okay, how do we build an organizational construct? How do we bring in measures and incentives? What is the HR stuff? How do we employ people? Who do we hire? What skills do we need? They focused on that one product. It's a very incremental approach. They also built around it an agile change team that was using agility to introduce this product approach, because it's a complex problem, right? So they have sprint goals, kind of. They have a backlog of issues, HR, the review process, release process, how do we work with, all of these things are in a backlog. The other thing that's important is there's a reason. So those organizations I've talked to, the reason why they're doing it is because the existing organization wasn't right for the thing that they were building. So they created a new one for that thing. There was a reason for change. If you're not in that situation where you haven't got that opportunity to incrementally change, don't despair. Well, despair a little bit. Product mindset is most important. So when you go back to your backlogs, to your Scrum teams, or your Kanban teams, or your SAFe teams, which isn't a bad thing, when you go back to those organizations, take that product mindset. Look at your backlog. See if value is clear. Customers are clear. Why would they want it? Who's paying for it? What is the outcome we're seeking? How do these things group, cluster in a way that gives something that's observable and usable by the client? Take that mindset. It's super valuable. And it can help us, in spite of the project organization we're in, to move to a different way. So, the Agile Product Operating Model and Evidence-Based Approach. Bit of a mouthful. Product, I think, is a really useful construct that can help us think about the world in a different way, align to the world in a different way, and invest in a different way. It's a natural evolution of agility, bringing together all those ideas that we've been having for the last 30-some years with some modern ideas around product thinking, design thinking, and business thinking, like lean startup. It's a natural evolution. Each product, however, needs more than just a name. It needs a business strategy. It needs a technical roadmap. It needs to understand the financial case, the operational case, and obviously who's in charge. You can then support that with an operating model that's unique to that product, that's special for that product. Might be influenced by the organization you're in, but ultimately it's unique to that product. If you do that, I think you can be really, really successful. So we've been doing this. I've been talking to a lot of organizations over the last 9 months, really exploring these constructs in that context. Fidelity Investments is a financial services organization that provides that, has real clarity. The reason why they love it is they can say no more effectively, and it's only being applied in the IT part of the organization. A biotech organization is using it really to group teams and to determine investment decisions. A consumer packaged goods company is really using it to keep teams together instead of this continuous fluidity around initiatives and projects. So that's basically helping teams build a better bridge between strategy and execution. So it has some value. But don't take my word for it, as Buddha would say, right? Remember in Siddhara, he was sitting under a tree and he looked a bit messy, and this geezer comes up to him and goes, "Hey, people are saying that you've got some great ideas and I should trust you." And he goes, "Oh gosh, don't trust me. Look at me, I've got dirty feet." Never trust a person with dirty feet. I don't know why I said that. But anyway, so never trust people with dirty feet. Don't use that as a delimiter, sorry. And he goes, "Don't trust people with dirty feet, obviously. Don't trust me. But how about try something? Go back to your organization, take some of these ideas. Think about product. Think about how it would apply to the situation you're in and see if it helps. If it doesn't, fair enough. But it might. And that's what I would recommend moving forward. Thank you for your time. Hopefully this was enjoyable. Hopefully your hangovers aren't affecting you too much. And enjoy the rest of your time. I think we've got some time for questions, 3-4 minutes.
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Oh, Kate, yes.
I have to say that the questions that won, definitely, the poll inside, are kind of trolling questions.
Oh.
But let's see how you do with that.
Oh, gosh.
But I also selected one of the meaningful questions.
Oh, cool. Good.
So first, name 3 companies that implemented 100% Scrum and they're winning on the market.
Gosh, that's really hard. On our website, there's a lot of case studies. Like, for instance, I wouldn't say the whole company has adopted Scrum because Scrum is used for complex problems. And not everything in your company is a complex problem. But on the website, there is obviously the Gillette example, which is really, really, really cool. That's a great example. I think that really embodies it. If every time you do a trade, Fidelity Investments, that's using a Scrum project, etc. Obviously, interesting story about that the Broad Institute that was using the COVID testing. They're really cool. It's sort of illustrative of the challenge that you all have every day. So they built a full test lab, and they used it initially so they could get scientists back into the organization, and they used it for the families and everything to ensure that they had knowledge of COVID-19. They then, because they built massive capacity in this system, they said, "Would you like to use it?" Cambridge, this is the town, the city that the Broad Institute's in. And Cambridge City said, "Oh no, how do we pay for it?" And they said, "We'll give it you." "Oh no, we can't do that. That would be an unfair relationship." So the system wouldn't allow them. So Cambridge had to wait another 6 months for testing to be widespread in America. And the Broad Institute were just using it continuously. It was really disappointing, and they were very frustrated by that. But that sums up the disconnect between these agile teams that are delivering value to those. So there's some. Go to the website. There's loads and loads more. However, it's not at an organizational level usually. It's usually just at a product level or a sub-part of the organization that has a complex problem that needs to be filled. I think hopefully that answers the question.
All right, thanks. The question number 2. Why companies which are winning the market, Apple, Meta, NVIDIA, Tesla, are not using Scrum at all?
Not true.
Even more, because they're saying that it's all BS. That's the question.
Okay, so it's a really interesting question. So Apple. So we had an intern who went to Carnegie Mellon University and ended up getting a job at Apple. Guess what she does there now? She's a Scrum Master. Yes, she's also a developer. It's an accountability, not a role, but she is using Scrum in Apple. If you go to any of these, because I've thought that as well, so that's the reason why I visited Tesla. Yes, Tesla isn't officially doing Scrum. Well, bits of it are. You may have seen Joe Justice's presentation on it, right? Bits of Tesla are definitely doing Scrum officially, but there's bits that aren't that are very effective. But if you look at what they're actually doing, it looks a lot like Scrum. It is so amusing. Amazon is the same. And by the way, Amazon, according to our certs database, is doing some Scrum because there's a bunch of PSMs and PSM2s there. So it's not as black and white as you can paint it. What worries me, though, is something very fundamental. What we're seeing is a trend in organizations to go back to the way that we used to manage work, to go back to a hierarchy. Even if you look at the modern product people, they talk about the triad: lead developer, product owner, product manager, and UX person working together. They fill the backlog. There's a separate team doing discovery and validation. That then feeds into software teams that are doing work. That isn't what we want, right? We need to move to a different way of working. And the place to look isn't Silicon Valley, which is one of the most broken environments. Just because you've got a couple of successful organizations does not make the whole place amazing. Look to the organizations that are very human-centric. Look at the organizations that are actually delivering value to their community. Look at the organizations that you want to go and work for. There's a lot of that happening every day. And those are the organizations I think we should aspire to be. Not organizations that have, by accident, by chance, got a natural monopoly on a technology or an environment. So many of them are doing Scrum, even if it is under the covers.
And I know that technically the time is up, but I'm going to ask one last question.
Okay.
Which I think is quite meaningful. What is your experience on people, on top management, have no mindset on products, how that affects the organization?
I think that they're a product of a previous age. So I used to work with somebody called Kurt Bittner. He heavily involved in our leadership content, written a few books with him. And he says, you know, Agile's a bit like science. I said, oh, how's it like science, Kurt? He said, it progresses one funeral at a time. And I know he's being a little sort of ironic, I hope. I'd like to modify that, one retirement at a time. But ultimately, I think that most of the people that are leading organizations today were incredibly successful in the previous age. You saw yesterday the impact of technology like AI. It's going to be hugely disruptive. Every organization has to be digital to be successful. That requires a different mindset. In the same way as when we had the mass production mindset, you've all seen Les Miserables, right? That came along and fundamentally changed everything. That's the reason why Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, right? Because he hated it. But ultimately, I think this is the reality for the future. And we have to get into that mindset. And a lot of leaders do. A lot of this new generation of leaders that are coming through really do get it. And so I'm very hopeful and optimistic about the future for all of us, because I do think change is happening, even if it's not always called Agile.
All right.
Thank you.